Doing all right. How are you? Are you surviving captivity?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Mind over matter, right?
That's right. Where are you today?
So I'm home here in San Antonio. The nice thing is my mom spends quite a bit of time here because she just lives up the road. So, we're kind of Groundhog's Day, but it is what it is. We'll get through this.
It does seem like Groundhog Day a lot of times, with it's day after day, kind of the same thing. I don't know what your experience is like with your hair, but I know that mine is right now longer and higher than it has been in a long time. But it's the reality we're in right now.
That's right. Well, isn't it that the Texas saying is like the taller the hair, the closer to God, right?
Is that what it was? I thought it was the bigger the hat, but I guess it could go either way, right?
That's right.
Well, Gina Ortiz Jones, candidate for Texas Congressional District 23, also known as the biggest congressional district in America that doesn't take up a whole state. Is that right?
It's the sixth largest in the country.
One of the biggest. Okay.
Yeah, it's got 2 time zones. It's larger than Georgia, right? It's massive. It's massive.
And I imagine you've put a lot of miles on your cars over the past. This is your second time running. You came so close in 2018, and I gotta say you're the favorite this time. Having you're as far as I can see, you're leading the polls. You're leading in fundraising. You won was it a 5-way primary that you won outright this time?
That's right. Well, I mean, Ed, look, I don't get outworked, right? And as you mentioned, this is a big district, but unfortunately, this is a district that has been long underserved. And so that's quite motivating for me and for my team that's working very hard to make sure that we are successful in November.
And so for people who aren't too familiar with the 23rd Congressional District, tell us a little bit about where you grew up and how the part of the district you're from, how it's not just the geography and what it covers, but also the people that live there and how diverse it is from like Marfa to San Antonio.
Yeah, those are 2 different communities, huh?
That's right.
This district goes from San Antonio 500 miles west to El Paso, right? 800 miles of border are in the district, 29 counties. This is a district, though, where the number one issue is healthcare, and there were many underserved communities already before this pandemic, and unfortunately, this pandemic has only highlighted that. This is also a district that is a large part of it is in the Bexar County area where I grew up. And you've got a large military population. Military is City USA. I'm an Air Force veteran, Iraq War veteran. And so as we're thinking about, the impact of this on national security, it's a community like San Antonio and our large veteran population all throughout South and West Texas that understands not only the need for, foreign policy, national security policy that makes sense, but frankly, as we're tying it to now, right, when you see the absence of American leadership, what that ultimately means for our national security moving forward. But it's a district that has gone back and forth, when we talk about it politically, has gone back and forth and is a true swing district, right? The incumbent has won 3 times, never broke 50%. So this district was drawn to be a competitive race. As you mentioned, 926 votes was the margin last time. We are, despite getting massively outspent, right? And look, I ran against Will Hurd. I didn't run against Louis Gohmert, right? And so we scared him out of the race. Let's call it what it is. And we're very excited about making sure this district is finally well represented.
Well, and thank God you are. And going back to what you said about how this is a swing district, it's always been a close district. Even before Will Hurd was there, it was Ciro Rodriguez's seat. That was a seat that also went back and forth back then. I mean, this has been a trend in this district for quite a while. And I think the fact that you're one of those candidates who really exemplify that it's not about the wave, it's about the work, really shows your work ethic and how you've been able to make this competitive in 2018 and how you're making it competitive again in 2020. We've talked a little bit about the district and you touched on your background for a minute. I wonder if you can tell us a little bit more about yourself and not just your campaign, but also your upbringing. And I know that you had a really compelling story about how you were in Washington and how you decided to run for this race. If you can tell us a little bit more about those, I think a lot of the viewers would love to hear it.
Absolutely. I'm a first generation American. My mom actually came here over 40 years ago graduated from the #1 university in the Philippines, but wanted a chance at the American dream, right? A chance at a very special country whose promise is if you work hard, the sky's the limit. So my mom actually came here as a domestic helper. Like so many people, they know from a very young age that if they want a chance at their best possible life, they'll have to leave their home country. And so she instilled in my sister the importance of giving back to a country that has given us so much. It's why I served. It's why my sister continues to serve in the Navy to this day. But on top of that, I've also been fortunate I worked hard, studied hard, but earned a 4-year Air Force ROTC scholarship that allowed me to get an education and go on to serve our country. I worked in national security almost 15 years. As mentioned, started off as an intelligence officer in the Air Force, deployed to Iraq. I served under Don't Ask, Don't Tell. And I know there are some younger folks watching that may not know what that means, but what that policy meant at the time was that you could serve in the military, but you could just not be open about being a member of the LGBTQ community. And so, thankfully we are past that. But to put that in context, in my lifetime, right, 39 years old, I've seen the implementation of Don't Ask, Don't Tell, the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell, the implementation of the trans ban, and then the first viable LGBTQ candidate for president announced his candidacy. And Ed, the last two things happened within 48 hours of each other, right? so many vulnerable communities know the moment in time that we're in, and the LGBTQ community is absolutely part of that. So I, advised on operations all over Latin America, all over Africa, wrapped up my career working the executive office of the president on economic and national security issues. And yes, in 2016, had to take stock of, what is my service going to look like? I've served in countries where women and minorities are targeted, right? I've served in countries where government's disregard for conflict of interest has hollowed out those countries. And I've seen what happens when good people don't stand up in the face of tyranny. So as a civil servant, though, you serve agnostic. And so I, stayed on for 6 months to see what good I could do from within. It became clear that was going to be quite limited. And it was also clear that my community, the community that allowed me to grow up healthy, get an education, serve our country, was being, unfortunately underserved as a result of this administration and as a result of the poor representation at the time and which continues today. So I threw my name in the ring. I think, why Congress? I think a member of Congress really does three things at the end of the day, right? Regardless of what committee they sit on, what committee they chair. A member of Congress creates opportunities, protects opportunities, or they erase opportunities. They do that with how they vote. They do that with their record of silence. And we're seeing, that silence can be just as dangerous as those bad votes.
And speaking of, you mentioned the incumbent who is vacating right now and how he has been hard to kind of pin down in the past. He's not like a Louis Gohmert, you said. You talked about the importance of votes. There are so many important votes, and I think that in some cases he has either missed votes or just missed taking a position in order to give this false sense of security that maybe he's not that way. And I got to think that along the way, so many of your vulnerable communities, so many peoples that rely on somebody to give voice to their communities hasn't been there for them. Are you seeing a lot of that in not just the San Antonio districts, maybe some of the far western districts that are maybe a little more disconnected from the metro areas? What are you hearing from these folks out there?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, healthcare is the #1 issue in this district by far. It's 29 counties, 18 counties with 3 or less doctors, 3 counties with no doctors. Once you leave San Antonio and El Paso, Ed, there's 26 ICU beds for this entire district, a district I told you that is larger than Georgia, right? Yeah. And so we talk not only about access to care, it's certainly the cost of healthcare. And so, in a state that did not expand Medicaid, in a state where we have 20% of the uninsured kids in this country, right? To me, it's and given the health inequities that we have throughout, it's unconscionable to me that anybody would vote to take away somebody's healthcare protections if they have a pre-existing condition, right? And so, votes like that, people remember on top of votes to, again, vote for budgets that would slash Medicare and Social Security and so forth. It's not just those votes, though. I think, what I've also heard from voters is, we need somebody fighting for the things that matter in this district. We need somebody that is going to fight and make sure that our community health clinics in our rural communities have the funding that they need, not only in a pandemic, but they have the resources that they need, before and after, so they are not laying people off during a pandemic. I mean, if there's no greater indicator to me of a broken healthcare system when some of our rural communities and some of even our rural healthcare clinics, in our rural facilities, as well as some here in San Antonio, are laying people off during a pandemic, right? It's just not right. And I think this has been a reckoning for how we understand what we owe each other as part of that social contract.
Now, in your district, which again spans from San Antonio to El Paso and has so much in between, in those rural communities, I know that we've heard that hospitals have been closing in rural communities. Have you seen hospital closures in your district in the past decade?
What we have seen, there's been significant, closures of rural medical facilities in this district. One of the things that we've done, Ed, to highlight what's happening in our rural communities, we actually had a virtual town hall last week where we brought in two healthcare providers that work in communities that are both rural and on the border, right? To hear firsthand what these folks are facing and some of their challenges. And the person that we had from West Texas, Dr. Adrian Billings, he serves in Presidio, but also works at clinics in Marfa and Alpine. And this is as you know, in Presidio, there's no hospital there, right? It's 80 miles to the hospital in Alpine. By the way, the whole community in Presidio is served by 2 EMS. So God forbid you're the third person with an emergency, you're going to drive yourself to Alpine, right? Or see if you can get care in Ojinaga. And so when I asked, because we're hearing, tons of stories, not only about laying people off, which they are doing at the Big Bend Medical Facility, but also the shortage in PPE. And so he relayed this story of how he is decontaminating his N95 mask by putting it in a Ziploc bag and leaving it out in the sun for a couple of hours. And to me, look, in the richest country in the world, in a state that has a $1.8 trillion economy, right? The second largest in the country, the fact that we are second to last in testing and the fact that we are putting our medical professionals at risk in this way, it just speaks again to the importance of new leadership and leadership that's going to take these things seriously.
Right. Why should we be taking that risk when we should have the resources we need to be able to have the right equipment and the best equipment to do the best job at all times, right?
Yeah. Well, the thing is, we have the resources, we just don't have the leadership, right?
That's right.
That's what we're saying.
So Gina, let me ask you a little bit more about this. We talked about healthcare and how that impacts your district, and Texas has the highest percentage and the highest population of people who don't have healthcare in America. I'm sure your district is probably even higher numbers than the state average. But I want to talk a little bit more about how COVID-19 is impacting your district, both the economic effects in addition to the healthcare effects that we talked about. We've seen that people are getting stimulus checks, but what more does Congress need to do to make sure that communities are economically safe and that they can weather this pandemic? And I got to imagine that there's a lot of oil and gas in your district as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And so you touched on a couple of really important points in that many communities in West Texas are, and I've reached out to many of these elected officials, are not dealing just with the impact of the coronavirus, as they're also dealing with the significant drop in the price of oil. Right. So as they're trying to think about budgeting, not only for their local hospitals and for other activities, but they're doing so now with significantly less resources. And many of those communities are 90+% of their budget relies on those oil revenues. So this is an important time as they're, in Congress, as they're talking about the importance of assistance for state and local. I mean, it needs to consider some of the other some of these localized economic effects, like the drop in the in oil revenues. It's interesting though, when we talk about, the importance of addressing the economic piece of this, it actually ties back to the question that we just discussed, which is healthcare in our rural areas. In our rural areas, those medical professionals, if there are a rural hospital or a clinic, that's a significant employer, right? And so the fact that you're laying these people off during a pandemic means that that community is underserved medically, but also that means that there's families out of work. And the challenge in our rural areas is that we already, those communities already struggle to recruit and retain medical professionals in those communities. And so as I've talked to rural healthcare providers, their concern is as you lay these people off, it's not like you put a job announcement out in San Antonio or in Dallas for a healthcare professional and you've got 10, 15 applicants like that day, in rural communities, they just don't have that. They struggle to retain and recruit these folks. And so their concern is that even after this is done, it'll take them a lot longer to bring on new folks, which means these communities will be underserved again. When you to your point about how do we think about the economy after this, well, I think, you know, it has to start with that, is what do we want to make sure is there. And I think it's clear medical professionals have continued to say that, you know, it's really difficult to think about the economy rebounding if we don't have the healthcare infrastructure that allows us to address this, right? So that people can comfortably go back to work and do so in a safe and healthy way. So we've got to invest in it keeps coming back to, again, the testing, to the contact tracing, and to the ability to isolate. All that has to be in place before, you know, the economy can really rebound. I think when we also talk about, you know, making sure the economy, though, once we do all have that, we have to think about the pieces of the economy that are critical to many of those that are critical to making sure our economy rebounds as quickly as possible, right? So, for example, something that's not getting a lot of attention but should is the importance of healthcare. The importance of childcare, right? Childcare, absolutely. So many of our essential workers rely on it, right? Particularly women. And if we want to make sure that our economy rebounds as quickly as possible after this, people are going to have to need safe and secure daycare options right away. And so if people are now making, you know, decisions about, can I go back to work, can I not? Oftentimes that's based on the availability of childcare. And so those have to be prioritized when we think about, you know, relief support from Congress.
Yeah, and you know, childcare is one of those issues that we just don't hear enough about it in political circles. So it's so refreshing to hear you speak about it, because it really is not just a Texas issue, but like that is a national issue, something that people feel on a very personal basis. Absolutely. And a very big financial basis, right? I mean, it's not cheap.
And we've got we've got a $1.8 trillion economy. And that would mean if we want to rebound after this as quickly as possible, we have to think about the 1 in 10 kids in the country that calls Texas home, right? Yeah. And I think, you know, absolutely childcare has to be a critical part of that. And many of those are small businesses. And so the fact that they were not able to, you know, to access some of that funding that was set aside for PPP, unfortunately, because of, you know, some larger corporations that they, like Shake Shack, that thought they needed it more. Now, granted, they're returning it, but it does show you the importance of leaders at that level, certainly at all levels, but at that level, making sure the topic is addressed and there are safeguards to make sure that the assistance gets into the right hands.
Gina Ortiz Jones, candidate for the 23rd Congressional District, which goes from San Antonio to El Paso and covers everything in between. Thank you for joining us here. We have a few more questions, but for people who are just joining us, this is Gina's second run. She is the leading candidate in the race. She's leading in the polls, she's leading in finances, but most importantly, she's leading with the best messages in this race. And I want to ask you about a couple of more issues that are impacting your race, in particular, immigration. We hear a lot about that here in Texas. We hear a lot about it nationally. And many times it is vilified without any respect to how important immigration is, not just to the fabric of our families, but to the fabric of our economy. And you have a life story about that is rooted in immigration. My history is the same way. And I think that it's an important thing for people to hear about. How is that going in your district right now? How are people feeling it? How are they responding to it? And how are the attacks on immigration from the president and other members of the Texas Republican Party impacting your people, your district?
Yeah, well, you know, I think unfortunately this administration has shown where they are in this issue, so their comments are not surprising. For me, though, I will always continue to be surprised by the silence of so many of these Republicans as they allow, for example, you know, vulnerable communities like DACA recipients to be pushed in the shadows. And you're right. You know, as a first-generation American, you know, I feel a sensitivity to making sure that we are doing everything we can, because I fundamentally understand, and most people I think do, that immigration is an opportunity, right? Immigration is core to our story, as you have said, but it's also core to our future. As a veteran, you know, I also know that you know, 13%, right? 13% of all veterans are either foreign born or the children of foreign born people. So it's not just key to our economy; it's key to our national security. country. And so this is a district, 800 miles of border, as I mentioned, and you can't spend time in Del Rio for 2 seconds without somebody talking about the importance of Acuña, right? Eagle Pass, Piedras Negras, Presidio, Ojinaga, El Paso, Juarez, right? Those are social, cultural, economic ties that are sources of strength. And when we talk about building infrastructure, right, it really should be about making sure that we are leveraging and capitalizing on those sources of strength. When we talk about, immigration, though, I live just down the street, not too far from a community college, Northwest Vista, and then from UTSA, University of Texas at San Antonio, which has one of the largest Dreamer populations and student populations in the entire country. And so the fact that folks would use this opportunity, this very to exclude these young people from assistance that would allow them to continue their education, that would allow them to contribute in an even greater way to our country, just doesn't make sense, right? It just doesn't make sense. And again, 1 in 6 active DACA recipients lives here in Texas. So these short-sighted policies disproportionately affect young people in Texas. And I think fighting for these young people who are American and Texan in every sense of the word is really fighting for Texas's future.
Once again, for people who are just joining us, I'm talking to Gina Ortiz Jones, who's a candidate for the 23rd Congressional District in Texas. If you have questions for us or for Gina, please enter them into the Facebook section, into the comments. We'll ask those questions while we have time here. We've got about a few more minutes, so please come on in with those questions. We're happy to ask them. Gina, I got a couple of questions for you. I want to turn to some lighter issues, and then I'll come back to the campaign and some political stuff. But how are you handling this COVID situation, the quarantine? I like to call it life in captivity. But how are you doing in this moment, and what are you doing to sort of break up the mundaneness of the day-to-day? We talked earlier about how it's like Groundhog Day. Like every day is like the day before. There's no difference between Monday and Saturday, it seems. What are you doing to lighten your spirits and lighten your load during all of this?
Well, thankfully, I've got great friends that still live in the community that I grew up in. And so, what we should be celebrating right now in San Antonio is Fiesta, right? So one of my good friends brought over some chicken on the stick for me yesterday, drive-through style, right? So nice. It's great that, San Antonio is just that kind of community, right? We're going to try to be as connected as we can. And so she was nice enough to drop that off yesterday. But I think, this is really a time to, I think, just be thankful and reflect on the things that are that I still have, my family still has, right? Like good health. And, yes, things can be much, much better. And there is lots of work to do now between now and November to make sure that we never have to deal with this again, or at least have competent people should we have to deal with a pandemic again. But it's been a time to focus on what's most important, and the health of my health, but as well as most of my friends and family. I do know, frankly, a couple of folks that are dealing with this in their immediate families, and it's unfortunate. My heart goes out to them, as well as to anybody joining today that is being affected by that. And so the walks during the day help to clear the mind. We've got a great dog, Harley, rescue, that is fun to play with, but nice. It's you break up the day as you can, but frankly, I'm also very focused on what we need to do in November.
Well, wait a minute now. Tell me a little. You can't just mention your dog Harley and not tell us any more about it. What you say to rescue? Yeah, sure. What kind of is it? Is Harley a mix? Is Harley a boy or a girl? So Harley is a terrier mix, and so Harley, the name comes from my mom teaches at Harlandale High School on the South Side in San Antonio, and he's a rescue. She was in the parking lot one day, and he went up to her, and that's how it started. So he wasn't shipped, any of that. So she brought him over, and he's been a nice addition. He's fun. He's fun. Well, as we like to say, it's sometimes we rescue dogs, but most of the time they're rescuing us, right? Yeah, exactly. Yeah, he's great. All right, so we got a few more minutes left here. I want to come back to the campaign, and I want to ask you, we've had a lot of conversations about voting rights in Texas. And Texas is one of the most restrictive voting states in the nation. I think some people may not even realize how restrictive it can be, but we have seen people show up and find a way to vote. But having said that, we're still fighting for more ways for them to be able to vote, particularly to be able to vote by mail, which might be an issue, again, in an expansive district like the one you're running in, the 23rd district. How can we ensure that every Texan is able to access the ballot box and protect their health this year while we know that there's still a very highly contagious virus out there?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is the time where we should be thinking about the preparations that are needed, especially as all the medical professionals are pointing to, a resurgence of this in the fall. And so we should not be caught flat-footed. There's no reason for us to be caught flat-footed. And frankly, we've seen in Wisconsin already reports of confirmed COVID-19 cases that are suspected to be based on when people were forced to go vote in person, right? Which is just, again, ridiculous. And so I think absolutely everyone should be able to vote by mail, right? Every registered voter in Texas should be able to vote by mail. That's just a logical conclusion.
Kind of a no-brainer, right?
You think, right? You think. I mean, if your intent is to get people to allow people to vote, then that's where you go. Right. There are also certain things that we need to do before then, which is, for example, allow people to register to vote online, right? These are just basic things that if you want people to vote, you will put in motion. But unfortunately, we've seen from our state leadership that that's not their focus.
Right. Okay, so just before we wrap up here, I want to ask you, how has campaigning changed for you in the era of coronavirus? What has obviously there's been some necessary transformations. Going door to door is probably not a thing for you right now. What have you changed, and how can voters connect with you?
Yeah, well, a couple of weeks ago, we saw clearly there was just a dearth of information. People needed access to the type of information that could help them make good decisions, right, in the interest of their health, their family's health, and the economic crisis. And so a couple of weeks ago, we put out a survey in English and in Spanish about what people needed, what help they needed, how we could be of service to them. And so we used that to develop a resource guide, which we update on a daily basis, and it's on our website and it's also on all of our social media platforms. It's a resource in English and in Spanish again, everything from employment resources, financial assistance as that's becoming available, healthcare resources, legal aid resources, again, anything that can help people make decisions in the interest of their economic security and their health. We have tried to identify that and put that in that resource guide. We also do virtual town halls every single week. We have done a virtual town hall. So we did the fourth one this Friday, but we're based on what people are asking us about. We want to connect them to the expertise, right? So the first one, we had a local physician come on, kind of COVID 101, right? What does this mean for me and my family? Lots of questions about how COVID-19 has impacted learning in South and West Texas. So we brought in 2 Texas State Board of Education members, and between those 2 leaders, they covered all 29 counties in this district. And Ed, it was really interesting to hear some of the parallel challenges that they're hearing about, but for different reasons, right? So South San Antonio, it's about not, some of the challenges are related to people not being able to afford internet at home, not being able to afford a computer at home. And in West Texas, there's not a strong enough broadband connection. Either way, the result is the same, is that young people are not having access to a quality public education. And so I think what this has really shown is, and in the conversations, we keep coming back to this theme of, there are things that we need to do to help people now, but I think people are also seeing the type of representative that we need that is going to fight for the things that ensure that people are not so quickly left behind in emergencies like the ones that we're dealing with, right? So if you believe that every child in Texas should have access to a quality public education in times of crisis and not, this is what that investment looks like, right? This is what we need to do. And so I think it's just reinforced the importance of what good government can do, and the absolute necessity of somebody who's going to be fighting for this district and beholden only to this district.
Right. And the thing about these crises is that, first of all, they really reveal our true selves, like Absolutely. What our true needs and how the way that our leaders can really step up to the occasion and help. But also in that it's, a pandemic may be a once in a lifetime thing, but we've also got a healthcare crisis. We had a hurricane that affected the Gulf, but extended to impact families throughout the entire state. the year before that. I mean, leadership matters so much. And I got to say, Gina, we first met in June of 2017. I remember that first phone call, and you have been such a hard worker and a good friend ever since. I'm really proud of everything you've done and how far you've come. And I know that you're already doing a great job standing up for this district. A couple of ways people can get a hold of you. I'm going to suggest that they can look you up on Facebook, Gina Ortiz Jones, and then they can also follow you on Twitter, probably join your email list as well. Is there anything else you'd like people to do to get involved with your campaign and maybe help you take back this district in Texas?
Absolutely. So I've got a wonderful I've got a wonderful field director, Jose, and he is leading the charge with our virtual field office. And so there are opportunities right now. We have shown us the continued need to organize our community. So we're just doing that virtually, and there are lots of opportunities to do that in this district. So when they reach out to us, we'll be able to talk them through some of the trainings that are available and the help that is needed. Phone banking, text banking, lots of opportunities to be part of this effort to take back this seat.
And even people who don't live in the 23rd district in San Antonio or El Paso, if you're anywhere in Texas and you care about taking back a district and giving true voice to people and really fighting for progressive values that you care about, Gina's race is a great place to do. If you live in Dallas and you want to help out, Gina, can you put people in Dallas to work? I'm sure you can, right?
Absolutely. Anyway, absolutely. Well, as we're seeing, right, when these people vote against your healthcare, when they vote against X, Y, or Z, that's not just restricted to San Antonio or Alpine or Marfa. That affects the entire country. So yes, so if you live in a district that is maybe unfortunately safely red or safely blue, adopt us. This is a seat we can absolutely pick up. 926 votes, right? Is all it was, despite being massively outspent. So we can take back this seat and help to protect the Democratic majority.
I love it. Before we go, I have one last question. I want to end it on a positive note. Yeah. Gina Ortiz Jones, candidate for 23rd District, a good friend of Progress Texas. What are you looking forward to when all is said and done in this COVID crisis or in this campaign? What is it that keeps you going? What are you looking forward to down the road?
Well, I'm looking forward to winning, and I'm looking forward.
We are too.
I'm looking forward to making sure this district, my community, is finally well represented. I am also very much looking forward to. My friend came. I mentioned yesterday. She came and dropped off a chicken on the stick, and I wanted to instinctively actually go up and give her a hug, right? Like just something basic, right? Just that basic level of connectivity and contact that you were so used to. I'm looking forward to those small things, which, this time has shown us are just really the most important things, right?
Yeah. Gina Ortiz Jones, thank you so much. Really appreciate it. And good luck to you. We'll be rooting for you, and hope to talk to you again soon.
Thank you. And thank you so much for all the hard work that Progress Texas does to make sure that our state, lives up to its true values. So thank you so much. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
All right.